Before we talk about the Holocaust as symbol, let's take a look at the different ways it has been referred to and defined. The word Holocaust has a long history. Directly translated from the Greek, it refers to a burnt offering to the gods. But over the past millennia, the meaning has transformed. In the early medieval period, it entered into English to mean a sacrifice on a larger scale. And then by the early modern period, this meaning is expanded to include large-scale massacres, slaughter, and destruction. First applied to the genocide of the Jews in the 1940s, its scope is narrowed and cemented by historians in the 1960s. In the past decades, however, the term has been applied to broader notions of catastrophic events. This is why when you write about the Holocaust as genocide, you will need to capitalize it. Some scholars have pointed out the problems with using a term that once denoted an offering, as if it was intended to be redemptive, while there is nothing redemptive about the genocide for its victims. This critique has prompted the suggestion and adoption of other terms such as Shoah and Kurban. Shoah stems from Hebrew and refers to a catastrophe, and it is the official term used by the Knesset in Israel for the Day of Remembrance. Kurban stems from Yiddish, the language spoken by the majority of European Jewry at the time. And is another term that historians sometimes adopt is the final solution, which stems from German, the language of the perpetrators. And it insinuates that there is some sort of problem needing to be solved. So for us, we will refer to it as the Holocaust, even though there are other terms in specific contexts that may be used. Ask yourself what you know about the Holocaust. What kind of exposure do you have to the topic? Where does your knowledge come from? Is it from books, schools, museums, films? The vast majority of Americans get their knowledge of history from film and television. And while film can engage audiences and spur further interest and attention to important topics, it is incredibly reductive. Ask yourself, what stark contrast must there be between an actor who returns home every night from a set and the brutal conditions of a camp? Can this experience ever be conveyed in that sort of context? The film ends, the book ends, but the experience of the camp for survivors permeates the rest of their lives. The films rely on stereotypes to move audiences through their journey rather quickly. But this also means that the stories remain simple. And we know that real life is much more complex, can be much more tragic or uplifting, more in every sense of the word. So to understand what happened, we will need to expand our horizons of what we think we know and how one can represent this knowledge. We do not study the Holocaust to cast doubt or minimize suffering. To do so is to deny reality, but rather we will examine how attempts to convey the truth of the experience have been made through literature, film, and other mediums. The focus of this course is to examine the problem of the representation of the Holocaust, to explore its complexities, and to expand our understanding of it beyond just the symbolic and cliche. When the Nazis entered into power in 1933, there were 9.5 million Jews living in Europe. They soon legalized discrimination with ruthless, autocratic, and totalitarian measures. It was first after the war broke out that full-scale genocide would take place. But even before the death factories, the industrialization of genocide on a large scale, there were mass murders that were being carried out across all the occupied territories. The death camps themselves were discussed and decided upon at the Wannsee Conference in 1942, building off of what they had learned from the euthanasia program in Germany. The initial plans called for complete destruction of Jews and all other human life in the East. And by the end of the war, there were over 20,000 camps and subcamps spread across Germany and Eastern Europe. The first camp was erected already in 1933 at Dachau for the political enemies of the Nazis. For those who were not outright assassinated, they could have come from progressive, moderate, conservative parties, or even some were from the Nazi Party themselves who were considered rivals. With German Jews making up less than 1% of the population, it would be some time, at least, before they were deported to the labor and death camps in the East. Instead, their experience would include ever-escalating restrictions and loss of civil liberties and rights within Germany. It was first in 1938 that more and more German Jews were put into concentration camps like Sachsenhausen, Buchenwald, and Ohrdruf. In 1939, after the invasion of Austria, deportations began of Austrian Jews. After the outbreak of the war in Poland, the camps in Germany became transit centers to the east. In 1941, Jews in Germany and occupied territories were relocated to camps and ghettos. And after the invasion of the Soviet Union, that's where the death squads and soon thereafter the death factories are instituted in the east. Did you notice how far away from Germany these atrocities take place? It indicates that the Nazis wanted to keep this hidden from public view and international scrutiny. They knew it would cause unrest, bring condemnation, and blemish their self-serving narrative of heroism. So in trying to understand the Holocaust, we will focus on survivors because they have the stories to tell. We will look at the experience of persecution, discrimination, and racism implemented systematically by the Nazis, including life as it was in the ghettos, in the different camps, as well as in hiding or fighting back. We will deal with the repercussions of genocide in subsequent generations, the experience of refugees and of other victims. In 1939, the first gassing victims were German, and they were children and youth, 5,000 in number, aged 0 to 17 years old, with physical and mental disabilities. In August, their parents had been encouraged to admit them, nurses and doctors required to register them, and by October, they were being systematically murdered. Adults with disabilities were soon included and sent to one of the 5 places of healing and care in Germany that had been transformed into killing centers, where hundreds of thousands would be murdered in secret. Condolence letters giving falsified information were sent to the grieving parents and families, while as the war progressed, the experienced nurses and doctors would be sent to train and erect the gas chambers at the death camps in the east. Other victims included the tens of thousands of Russian POWs who were executed upon surrender, who were sent to death in labor camps. Partisans and helpers of every nationality, if they were caught, they suffered similar fates. The systematic persecution, internment, and murder of other groups also included homosexuals, Sinti and Roma, political and ideological opponents, such as the Jehovah's Witnesses or other resistance groups like the White Rose. Just looking at the 20th century, there have been other genocides. The Armenian genocide served as a model for the Nazis, whereby the Ottoman Turks murdered 1.5 million of their Armenian citizens, many children surviving only because their Turkish neighbors hid them away. Under Stalin, our ally during the war, an estimated 12 million perished in gulags, were starved, or were murdered at his command. The communist takeover of Cambodia fueled the genocide directed by Pol Pot, whose regime implemented an extensive network of prison camps and killing fields that claimed an estimated 2 million victims from 1975 to 1979. A decade earlier, upwards of 3 million were imprisoned and murdered under the Suharto regime in Indonesia in 1965 and 66. The Rwandan genocide of 1994 saw the brutal murder of as many as 800,000 of the Tutsi minority over a few days. And today in Syria, Myanmar, and in other areas of conflict, each has a potential for genocide and the ensuing catastrophic displacement of populations as refugees flee from the violence. Our own history in the United States has yet to fully acknowledge and face the legacy of racism and systematic oppression. Is it problematic then that we study the Holocaust as something unique and examine the others so not as closely? What does it say about us? Does it change the way we respond to other genocides? Does it remain a thing of the past? What is particular about the Holocaust? It is symbolic. The Holocaust represents a great evil, the limits of suffering. As a symbol, however, the Holocaust remains obscured, and while so, we may not fully recognize what happened. We may no longer consider or relate to the individuals who experienced it and their stories. Throughout the course, we will look at what makes the Holocaust a unique event. We will look at what happened, what can be learned, how people survived, how people resisted, how they maintained or even developed their integrity of character and their values, how they pushed back against the planned destruction of their person, of their people, and how they have coped with the trauma, and how their reflections and their understanding of their experiences can be helpful in indicating warning signs, the consequences of discrimination, prejudice, and racism, and the necessity of being an active participant in history.